Welcome to Don't Fear the Weight podcast with your host Vicky Masita, bringing together science and personal experience.
Hi guys, welcome to the next episode of Don't Fear the Weight. I am, as per usual, your tiny titan host, Vicky Masita, and today I have a very, very good friend with me, Dr. Andrew Chappell. Hey Andy, how are you?
Hi, how you doing? I'm all right, thanks very much. Keeping
Good,
well up
good.
here in Sheffield.
Excellent. So we've just been discussing the weather, as you do, and the weather is absolutely horrible. So with Andy being just a massive mountain of a man just now, he obviously isn't feeling the cold like some of us other people. So quite jealous of that fact. Anyway, this is the second time that I've brought Andy onto the podcast because of the simple fact that he is an extremely intelligent guy, and he's just published a research paper in regards to protein synthesis and the best way or high caliber bodybuilders, how they approach their nutrition going into shows. So we're going to discuss that, as well as discussing some little extra kind of bits that we're going to go into, including psychology. Sorry, there's my ridiculously loud dog there because somebody's come to the house. This better. I'm going to keep that in because. So anyway, Andy, let's get straight into it. Why don't you give us a little bit of a synopsis of the paper that you've recently published?
Sure. Okay, so if anyone's looking to find the paper, if you go to the Journal of the International Society of Nutrition, so if you go on their website, it's still one of the top links that's on there. So you just go a little bit down the page, you should be able to find it. Now, I must make sure I get the title right of this, and it is, I'm sure it's pre-competition, or is it dietary strategies of high-level competitive bodybuilders. So if you do a search for that under Chappell, Simper, and Barker, you should be able to find that, and that's published this year for anyone who wants to go out there and actually find the paper itself. So what did we do then? Well, we spoke about this a little bit last time on the podcast. So if anyone wants all the detail, they can go to that podcast and they can listen to that one there. And we had some good discussions around that. What we did was we were interested to see, okay, well, what strategies were competitive bodybuilders following to get themselves in shape for bodybuilding contests itself? Because there's, as you know and I know, there's lots of information out there on how you could potentially get yourself in shape to build muscle, lose fat, etc. But the amount of research that we actually have published based on actual bodybuilding populations is very limited. So there's not a lot out there from that respect. And many of the guidelines that we see just now are based on non-bodybuilding populations. So we wondered, well, do these guidelines fit in really with what people are actually doing? So i.e., do bodybuilders follow evidence-based guidelines? And what are the best competitors actually doing in terms of the strategies to get themselves in shape? So we divided up our cohort. We had people that did very well at the competition, and we had people that they didn't place in the competition itself. And we wondered, was there a difference in the strategies that the people that were following that did very well compared to the people that didn't do very well? So we went to the British Natural Bodybuilding Federation finals way back in 2016 now, that was, I can remember that. And we recruited 50 competitors that were taking part in the competition on that day. We gave them out a questionnaire, so it was a survey questionnaire. It took them about 10 to 15 minutes to fill in. There's 34 different items on there, so we asked them questions about their supplementation, their dietary intake, their training strategies in terms of resistance training, cardiovascular training, the dietary approach they took. Did they decide to go high carb, low carb, etc. from there? If they had a coach, for example, how much caffeine they had, meal sort of frequency, experience. So we had a whole host of different questions on there. The sort of things that you think, you might imagine might make a difference to sort of someone's competitive outcome. So that's the study and what we did. And we also asked them, actually, I should mention this, how their diet changed over the duration of their contest preparation. So you know and I know that bodybuilder strategies they tend to be very meticulous. They're very methodical in what they do in terms of their approach. But the dietary strategies that people tend to follow, they tend to be fairly bland. So what someone has at start of diet typically is what they're going to have at the end of the diet. The only difference really is the proportions of the food in which they eat. So people just typically follow a diet and they eat a little bit less as they come into the show. And then there's a few sort of different deviations on that. So some people might go calorie cycling. Some people might have cheat days and things like that. But on the whole, if you can capture what someone's doing more or less day to day at the different time points, then you can get a fairly good idea of what someone's sort of intaking in terms of strategy. So we did that as well, and then we want to see, okay, how does the diet change over time as well? Then we compare it all. So that's the study. If you can you can take it all in, and I suppose we want to know what we kind of found from this.
Yeah, we can do, definitely, if you want to give just like a little bit of a rundown from it, and then we'll delve into the questions a little bit, and I'll pick your brains and pick the paper apart.
I'll tell you what, you delve into the questions, and then I'll answer them for you. I think that's maybe a better way to do it. Because we went over this last time, and I don't want to go over a ground we maybe covered already.
Exactly. Okay, so cool. So in regards to the published findings, we found that the majority of high-level bodybuilders actually had a much higher intake of carbohydrates throughout their entire training schedule, all the way up until contest prep. Yeah. Now, did you find that there was a certain carbohydrate source that was a preferred method that a lot of people use? So, for example, was it potatoes? Was it rice? Was it breads? You know, because at the moment, bread's the devil, you know, compared to old style bodybuilding. So what did you find? Mm.
Okay, so on that point there, we did some statistical analysis on the data here. And the statistical analysis shows us that in terms of differences between the high-level competitor, the ones that do well compared to the ones that don't do well, we didn't actually find a statistically significant difference when you do the traditional sort of statistical tests. When you do a different set of tests, so we look at something called effect sizes, we do see sort of differences in that way there. So for the science geeks out there, that's an important sort of caveat that we have to sort of make. However, if you look at the data, you can see that it does look like there probably is looking like a bit of a trend. So to sort of say that you're consuming a little bit more than ours. Mm. In terms of the sort of calories that people are consuming, where they're getting their major sources, if you look at the table, I think it's table 4, because I looked this morning because I knew you were going to ask me this. We broke it down into the different sort of food items that people were typically consuming throughout the diet. And based on what people are more or less consuming, you're saying maybe about 13-ish sort of food items is what someone typically sort of consumes. So that might be, say, I don't know, if you imagine a piece of chicken's a food item, a potato is a food item, and so on. So the diet is not necessarily that varied on the whole. However, we only got sort of snapshots of people's diets, so we don't know what they were consuming all the time. So over the course of, like, say, a week, they might have included 1 or 2 different food items here and there, just as people might do. But we're looking at about sort of 13 different food items, and as they get closer to competition, we sort of see that maybe there is a reduction slightly in the food items in terms of the variety. So you start off around about 13. By the end of it, they're maybe about, say, 11. So maybe they're taking something out of the diet. Female diets are slightly more varied, so they seem to be having slightly more different food items than males, but not much more. So you might be talking 14 food items, and then by the end, 12 food items. So maybe like something more than us guys. From that, women are definitely more sensible anyway. They're not willing to make themselves suffer by eating less variety. In terms of the different sort of foods that people are eating, believe it or not, and I think this is quite cool, if you take something like the Eat Well guide, so you know what that plate looks like, or like the Harvard sort of food plate, or even some of these sort of food pyramids, if you like, which are the sort of classical thing you see put out by these food standards agencies or EFSA and things like this, then actually when you divvy it up in terms of the proportions of, say, cereals, tubers, so by tubers we mean like potatoes, grains, nuts, seeds, dairy, fish, meat, etc. It's not too dissimilar to one of them if you actually break it up like that, which is kind of interesting actually. It's just that bodybuilders are eating much more food in sort of general, and that the divide is actually is not too dissimilar to that. Now this is based on this population, and I should sort of And then so that's just the sort of the overall mean trend, because there are people that are going to follow things like a paleo style diet, and that doesn't look anything like that sort of food pyramid. Now, the sort of cereals, I've just kind of loaded the question there, but the sort of foods that people are eating are cereals. So people eat rice, for example. They eat things like oatmeal, oats, quinoa. These seem to be the sort of the major sort of sources of carbohydrates that people are consuming, along with tubers as well. So sweet potatoes and white potatoes. I'm afraid it looks like bread is still the devil, though, because people don't seem to really be consuming bread, which is maybe a bit of a shame, because we know that obviously there's a good source of carbohydrate there. It's high in protein as well because it's a wheat source, and if you've got like a wholemeal source as well, because you've got the germ still within that, then you'll get a little bit of fat in there as well. So it's a good sort of all-round energy source for a competitive bodybuilder potentially to have. But it seems like people are staying away from bread. Reasons why they might be doing it, it's difficult to say, but I think I discussed this with you before when I said, well, how do you fit the bread into your diet, and what do you have typically bread with? So people tend to eat bread with things like soups, don't they, or they sandwiches and things like this, and maybe just the pairing of bread with food items doesn't really work in with the sort of traditional bodybuilding style diet. So
possibly so, yeah. I remember talking about this actually. We went for a coffee, didn't we, before we went and trained in Sheffield, and we discussed this because myself and Andy always have a sandwich when we go to work, because it's very easy and simple to get down. Exactly, and it fits. And if you think about it, if you have a sandwich, I mean, I have an anabolic sandwich every day, and I make sure that I put that on my Instagram feed, for the simple fact that people are just demonizing sandwiches and demonizing bread.
Yeah, sure.
But if you actually think about it and break down a sandwich, you've got 2 slices of bread, excellent sources of carbohydrate. And like you said, everything that you just said there is within it. Exactly. You fill it with chicken, a little bit of salad, and maybe put a slice of, I don't know, cheese or on it there. You've got a completely balanced meal there that you can fit very easily into your diet, because you've got carbohydrates, good source of protein, and a little bit of fat there as well to help satiation and slow down your digestive system. So let's just kind of bury that myth that sandwiches are bad for you, and that possibly adding in some bread could give you a more competitive edge. However, you've then got to take into account whether or not you are susceptible to bloating with bread, which a lot of people do have. So did you find that? Obviously, we were talking that you had not a very varied source of food and things. Did you find that people actually discussed any kind of digestive issues or any mineral or vitamin imbalances because of the simple fact that they're not exposing themselves to all these vitamins?
Sure. Okay, so I mean, let's break that down and maybe handle the first question. So that's not something that the study was really set up to address. So we don't know if people were having, say, digestive issues throughout the contest preparation. I mean, with the increase in awareness of gluten and gluten intolerances, maybe that's a potential other reason why people maybe avoid bread throughout the competitive diet, because they don't want to get untowards extra bloating, because obviously you want a nice flat appearance. So I guess we don't really know. We did do some vitamin and mineral analysis with this study, however, and we didn't publish this stuff, because if you want to assess vitamin and mineral intake, then typically what you've got to do is you've got to use a technique called a food frequency questionnaire, which assesses dietary intake over a 6-month period, and it would ask you questions like, say, on average, how often do you consume, say, portions of this per week, per day? How often in the last month have you consumed this, and so on? Or the other thing you do is you do long-term food diaries. So you have food diary intake for, say, 7 to sort of 14 days. And the reason you have to assess vitamin and mineral intake in this sort of manner is because you've got your water-soluble vitamins, so B and C. They'll pass through your body relatively quickly, but your fat-soluble vitamins, you can retain some of these. So you've got a slight difference when it comes to actually assessing what someone's vitamin and mineral status might potentially be. You have to do it for a longer sort of duration. So based on the method that we use, we couldn't really publish the data that we had on vitamin and mineral research. We did do the analysis though, so I know from looking at the vitamins and mineral intake based on what the competitors were potentially consuming, that it doesn't look like people are actually really at risk at all of really being deficient, just based on the limited analysis that we did. The other thing that we have as well is we know what sort of vitamin and mineral supplements that people potentially take as well. So large proportion of the population are taking things like a multivitamin. Vitamin C is very common, vitamin D is very common as well, omega-3 fatty acids. These are all sort of very common as well. So people are not potentially at risk in this respect from being nutrient deficient from there. Now, because I knew you were going to ask me this sort of question, and how it might potentially relate to bloating, there's a nice case study that was published the other year there, which was in that same journal that we were published in. And it was, just having a look here, it was Gardii, and it is GISSN, and it's 2015. And this is a case of a bodybuilder who's got their own self-prescribed diet that they've put together for themselves. And they've been following it for the last sort of 16 years, according to, yeah, very well done. Or at least they've been following something on and off, similar to it for the last 16 years. And this competitor was suffering from severe gastrointestinal issues, so things like you were describing there, like bloating, cramps, indigestion. And the thing about IBS is that people don't realise, I guess, if you're not a sufferer from IBS, is that you have a whole host of these symptoms, and along with it, you get things like depression associated with these things as well. So it really affects people's quality of life. So this competitor had actually ceased their training for the last 6 months because they couldn't handle it anymore because of all the gastrointestinal issues that they were having off the back of it. And when they went to see the gastroenterologist who wrote up this study, when they looked at the person's diet, they noticed that they were massively over-consuming vitamins and minerals. So taking vitamin and mineral supplements, and that they were also consuming large amounts of protein. So when they adjusted the diet, they took out all the dietary protein, they took out all the vitamins and minerals, and that severely reduced all the symptoms that this person was potentially having. So they're having too much zinc, too much iron, too much selenium off the back of this. And they also did some other things. So they gave them like a probiotic, which I'll get on and talk about later. And this seemed to potentially help this person. So it's not necessarily always just a case of, well, it's maybe gluten or it's bread or something per se that could be potentially leading to bloating issues and things like this. Anyway, I guess is what we're saying from that. Okay, so does that answer all those questions? I think we've covered some of them, or at least I've given you something.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it does. So in regards to obviously having just a small amount of varied foods, then, you know, that's obviously proving that point. But it's very, very interesting that a competitive bodybuilder has actually built up an intolerance to protein, because everybody is now, well, everybody's aware of it, that protein is your muscle building source. But you can obviously be over consuming that. Now, what about when it comes to protein turnover? If you've got a personal protein turnover that's very, very good, some people now are going up to like 2 grams per pound of body weight, sometimes 2.5, especially when they're in both. So in both your off season trying to build muscle, and obviously when you're cutting in regards to keeping hold of that muscle. So, I mean, I've personally done this myself. I weigh 112 pounds and my protein went up to 250 grams at my highest. And I started experiencing a lot of bloating and issues. And I did think that it had a lot to do with the protein. So I've now reduced that down to 180, which is still quite high for somebody of my size.
Yeah, sure.
But just overnight, it seems to have kind of settled my bloating, but I'm still having like every other day bloating. So it's interesting that it's not just carbohydrates, and it might not just be some fats that are causing some bloating, but protein as well. Do you think it could be an actual source of protein? Because obviously there are different proteins that you can have. And do you think that a particular source of protein can cause more issues than others?
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, based on that previous paper, that person had actually developed lactose intolerance. So they had ceased having certain types of protein as well. Okay. And if you've got excess amounts of protein and your body doesn't use all that excess protein, then your body has to excrete it as part of the urea cycle. So we just more or less get rid of all the excess nitrogen that way. However, before you do that, you have to get rid of that excess protein as ammonia.
Right.
And it's that potential ammonia which is causing potentially all that extra sort of bloating. Now, some of the bioactive compounds that you get in things like dairy, for example, so casein and whey, some of the these bioactive molecules are actually ligands, which means that they sort of form the same sort of jigsaw patterns, if you like, that can fit into the spaces that gluten fit into at the same sort of time. So the molecules can sort of activate the same sort of receptors. And obviously, if someone's got a gluten intolerance and you're having lots of sort of whey or casein that's got lots of these bioactive molecules that can then fit into the same sort of receptors that cause you issues, then that's going to give you a problem as well. I don't think it's an unsensible suggestion to sort of say that different types of protein could potentially give you sort of different types of issues. Because, I mean, as I've said there, you've got things like dairy, you've got things like soy, you've got things like pea, for example, hemp, lupin, meat. All these sort of products come with a whole host of bioactive compounds associated with them beyond just the normal macronutrients and micronutrients that have the potential to interact with your gastrointestinal tract and your immune system, and that could potentially give you problems. But I think we're really sort of starting to move out here with my sort of area of expertise on this, so I can only give you a little bit of this sort of stuff, and I wouldn't be confident really saying more than that on that sort of stuff.
No, that's cool. You know what I'm like? my brain just kind of starts going, and I wonder, and I just ask all these kind of things. So it's just interesting to kind of discuss it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it is interesting, of course.
Absolutely. So let's get into the other things then, in regards to normal. Okay. So we met up not so long ago, and we had a good training session. It was my powerlifting meet, actually, that you were there for, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And then after that, we went all out and we had a meal. And then I treated Andy to his first scoop of Baskin Robbins ice cream, which I think he got high on, which was brilliant. But from that, Andy actually walked me back to my car, and he said, "Oh, I've got a little food baby." Now, that is obviously bloating from the sheer volume of food that we're putting into our bellies. And that's different than different kinds of bloating than what we're talking about. So what would you say is a normal amount of bloating that some people would, or that most people would experience from sheer volumes of food? As bodybuilders, we eat a lot of food. And then when would you get to the point where it's something to actually start considering that something might be going wrong?
Okay, this is a great question, by the way. And I don't think I really sort of gave it credit for how complicated this question actually is until I started investigating this the other day there and started looking into see, okay, what factors potentially cause bloating. And it's quite complex. So what I'm going to say is there's a great article I found the other day there that's just simply entitled Abdominal Bloating. It's published in Gastroenterology. And I don't know, it must be about a 12 to 15,000 word article. I mean, wow. It's very, very complex, okay? So there are a number of sort of factors that can potentially sort of influence bloating. And I've got a sort of few things written down here. So we're saying things like, okay, well, not necessarily even associated with the foods that you're eating. So if a person sort of eats and starts to swallow excess amounts of air, then that is something that can potentially lead to sort of bloating as well. You've got air that might be sort of trapped in the food itself. So you can imagine differences between foods in terms of the sort of air content that they have within the foods itself. You've got the chemical reactions that go on within the stomach itself when you start to digest the foods, what compounds are potentially going to be released off of the back of it as well. And then we're talking about the diffusion of these different gases all in the abdominal cavity itself, okay? Now that's before we even get on to really where my expertise lies, which is in the colonic gut microbiota, whereby anything that doesn't really get digested in the upper gastrointestinal tract then goes down to the colon and then can be metabolized by gut microbes. And now these gut microbes in themselves, these will produce hydrogen gas, and they'll produce at the same time methane gas. Okay, so you get your flatulence as well. And depending on your composition of microbes, you get an influence on your ability to metabolize some of these sort of different carbohydrates. So you've got a whole host of different factors there that can contribute to potential bloating. What is a normal amount of bloating? Genuinely, I don't know.
I suppose that varies from person to person.
Yes, yes, I was going to say that. I was going to say that. Now, one of the things about the bloating that seems to be reported amongst physicians, and certainly they talk about it in that paper that I was referring to there, is the sort of disconnect between the person's own perception of bloating and the actual amount of bloating that's going on there. So are they actually potentially linked? So you might think, oh God, I'm so bloated. But then when you get the tape measure out, actually there's nothing really potentially going on there. But there's a number of issues with that, because you have to measure yourself when you're not bloated, and then you have to measure yourself when you're bloated as well. And they're sort of saying, well, there maybe is actually something going on there as well. But it kind of fits in with this idea of sort of IBS in general. So when we talk about IBS, we're talking about irritable bowel syndrome, okay? And I don't think we can really talk about this without really talking about irritable bowel syndrome, really. And the thing about irritable bowel syndrome is that we call it a syndrome. And things are typically called syndromes rather than diseases when we can't quite put our finger on what it actually is going on. So we're a little bit confused. So there's different types of IBS, and I'm going to go off into a little bit of a tangent here, but I think it's still relevant to the conversation that we're having. So you get IBS with diarrhea associated, you get IBS constipation associated, then you get IBS where we've got mixed syndromes associated, okay? So someone could have potentially IBS, and this is what's potentially causing some of the bloating beyond what is potentially a normal amount here. And the IBS itself, I mean, we're saying this can be caused by a whole host of potential different factors as well. So there's a potential disturbance in the interaction with the immune system and the actual GI tract itself. You can have a disturbance in the central nervous system processing of the information that it gets to go to the brain. So that is whereby you've got that sort of notion whereby you have got some sort of disturbance going on with your perception of bloating and actually something going on there. So you can see you've got a potential link in here as well. You've got alterations in the mucosal membrane. So your GI tract is surrounded by a mucosal membrane, and that just stops microbes from infiltrating your actual bloodstream, because you don't want that to happen. You'll get sepsis and things like this. And that can have consequences for the diffusion of sort of gases going on here as well. And then you've got another component here as well. So you can have malabsorption of nutrients as well. So people that maybe are lactose intolerant, for example, or they just don't break down different foods as well as other people, they might potentially result in having excess amount of carbohydrate then making its way through to the GI, through to the lower bowel. And then as a result of that, your microbes, well, if they've got more carbohydrate, they'll ferment a lot more, and then you'll get more potential bloating off of the back of that, because these microbes, they essentially just grow based on the fermentation of these different compounds. So that's IBS kind of going on, and you can see how there's a lot of different factors can potentially contribute to IBS and how they can potentially contribute to your potential bloating that you might have going on there as well. So I don't think I've really managed to answer your question as such of what is a normal amount of bloating, but maybe I've given a little bit of an overview of some of the different things that might be potentially causing some bloating that might be going on there. And I would refer them to that abdominal bloating paper that I was talking about earlier on, because it's kind of complicated.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'll get the link from you and we'll put that underneath here.
Sure, let's do that.
That's great. But that actually leads us quite nicely onto the psychological effects as well, actually, about trying to gain weight in an off season, because like you were talking about there, the psychological perception of you may be bloated fits in very, very well with the whole body dysmorphia type of thing.
Yeah, sure.
everybody is shredded when they got on stage, and then when they get off stage, they go and binge, they bloat, they think, oh my God, right, I'm going to go and do a load of cardio because I don't want to lose my abs. And then you're not going to make your progress that you want to do. So let's get on to, I mean, it would have been interesting actually if you carried on with this paper and actually carried on with these competitors' off-season diets and to see if they did vary or not, and just kind of increase it rather than decrease it. Would have been interesting to see. But
absolutely.
But what did you actually find, or in your point of view, being a competitive bodybuilder yourself, have you had any kind of psychological effects or different attitudes towards your body shape changing going into the off season?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we're currently doing just now that we're really interested in is the eating attitudes of competitive bodybuilders in the off season and in the current season just now. So we're now underway recruiting participants for a trial that we're doing on this to try and actually answer that question that you're actually putting to me just now. So that research is underway. And if I get a plug in for that, we're actually trying to recruit people. So if anyone's interested in taking part in this and they are a competitive bodybuilder, then please get in touch. I can send you the questionnaire. It'll take you about, say, 10 minutes to fill in. It's on Google, and then you send it away. So we've had about 50 to almost 60 people fill that questionnaire in so far.
Brilliant.
Both on-season and off-season competitors. And I've got some data out of that just now. So it's not a complete data set, but to go back to what you were saying earlier on, psychological adjustments and things like this, I think you change over time, definitely. So one thing that we know, if you look at the literature on this sort of stuff in terms of attitudes towards eating and maybe attitudes towards body perception, is that experienced competitors are more comfortable in their skin, if you like, than inexperienced competitors. And if I look at and that's reported in the literature, you can look that up. And my data set that I have, we see the same thing. So we've got questions that talk about, we've got a questionnaire, it's called the Body Uneasiness Test. You can take it yourself if you're interested. In fact, don't take it yourself, volunteer for my study. Study. Okay, so you can take something called the Body Uneasiness Test, and there's lots of other tests that are set up to measure this sort of stuff. But we see that competitors who are less experienced than competitors who are more experienced, those less experienced competitors have got more body image concerns than the experienced competitors. So for me, I'm okay with transitioning from the diet phase to the sort of the off-season phase as well. I think some of that's to do with my own personality and how I am, because we're measuring personality trait and in our study we're doing as well, because we want to know, well, is there something we can explain by personality that maybe contributes to these sort of things? Maybe it's not just bodybuilding per se that leads someone to have differences in their eating attitudes. Maybe that's a sort of factor in there. But I guess I sort of try and approach it like an athlete, and I know that I'm going to have periods whereby I'm going to be in good shape, and I'm going to have periods where I'm not in that contest shape. But I need that time of where I'm not going to be in contest shape to make the gains for my contest period. So I know I'm doing myself some good by being in that shape, not being in that shape, so that I can recover. So for me, I'm like, okay, well, this is just a phase in my training, and I don't need to worry about it because it's going to help me from here. But I can see how other people can be preoccupied and think, oh God, I'm losing my abs and stuff, and then you get a potentially unhealthy obsession.
Definitely.
That kind of answer your question there?
Yeah, definitely. On that questionnaire that you've got, have you got a question asking whether or not they've had a previous eating disorder?
Yes, we have. So, basically we did. So you fill in the questionnaire, and we're trying not to get people who have had previous eating disorders or currently have at least an eating disorder, because that kind of biases the results, because we know people that have been clinically diagnosed with having eating disorders where they're going to score higher in all the questionnaires. They're just going to score higher in terms of their attitudes towards food and their attitudes towards their own body. So that kind of biases things a little bit.
Definitely. It's very, very interesting, isn't it? Because people who have past histories of eating disorders automatically have that controlling and addictive personality.
Yeah.
So if you do have that addictive personality, I would personally see a big trait of not wanting to lose that physique in your off season, because you want to be in the best shape. Definitely. Okay, that's excellent. Which I love that.
Probably leads us on to another interesting question about what should you do in terms of your recovery into the off season. I mean, that's maybe the other thing we need to sort of think about, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. So talking from a natural point of view then, how long would you recommend a natural bodybuilder to have in an off season to actually fully recover from a contest prep? Because contest preps can be varied, couldn't it? I mean, we know that our good friend AJ Morris, he did a 42-week prep. Yeah,
it's a long time.
Oh, it's a very, very long time. But on average, how long do you on average prep for? About 16 weeks?
No, a little bit longer than that. Can I just hold on a second? I need to let my cat in.
Yeah.
There's a storm.
I'm not gonna edit this out. I am actually going to keep this in for comedic value. So mine was the dog, and Andy does the cat. So he's bringing his back now.
Okay, she's in.
Okay, brilliant.
She was making her back. Right. So how long do I prep for? I'm about 20 to 24 weeks myself. If you look at that paper that we've published, it seems like people on average to get ready for their British finals that they're doing about that same sort of time as well. That's factoring in the fact that they've also had to do a qualifier. And then from a qualifier, then they've then had to diet after that. Whether or not they choose to do 24, 26 odd weeks, if they're only focusing on the one show, is a different story altogether. But yeah, I'm about sort of 20 odd sort of weeks. Now, how long should a person have to sort of recover from their sort of show? Well, I mean, again, it's a great sort of question as well, because I mean, the answer to that is it really depends, doesn't it? It depends on the individual, where they started at to start with. So if they had a lot of weight to lose, they're going to be dieting for longer to get themselves in shape for the competition, and then the recovery phase afterwards. It depends on at what point you say they're recovered. So they maybe don't want to gain as much weight as they did to start with. They had to lose. So maybe they only want to gain 10 kilograms because they were, say, 15 kilograms out of shape, and that wasn't a sort of good place to start with. But that sort of person's more like a novice competitor sort of scenario, isn't it?
Sure.
If it's a different class, if you've only got, say, 3 kilograms to lose or something like that, and then you only have 3 kilograms to gain, and you're just sort of normally pretty happy going about, you've not got any sort of metabolic disturbances in terms of things like your body's own cortisol and testosterone ratios or things like that, then again, maybe it's only a short sort of recovery period for that person as well. If you're competing in, say, maybe you're like a body fitness person or like a bikini competitor, maybe you're actually just doing a 2-week diet or something like that for the show because you're in great shape all year round anyway. So again, it depends on the sort of class, it depends on the sort of individual. I mean, someone that's maybe doing a show for the first time, maybe you shouldn't be looking at doing strategies like a reverse dieting thing for a long period of time for someone after that anyway, because maybe they're going to ever do one show anyway.
Sure.
And we know that the attrition rate for bodybuilding competitors, I mean, your average person does about 3 years worth of competitions. And if you can imagine you put them through a reverse dieting sort of process after their first year or their second year, maybe they never make it to 3 years, maybe they never make it to 5 years because they're scunnered with it already. So you've got these sort of things to consider and the sort of level, but they kind of sort of bring it back. From the published literature we have on the recovery, there's a few studies that have been done on this, case studies, where they've just followed up competitors, say, after they've done their diets. And I think it's Kleiner's one of them, I think it is. If it's not, I can find out who the proper study is, because I've got them all saved. They're looking at a competitor, the dieting period, I think, was about 20 weeks, and then they followed them up for another 20 weeks afterwards. And they found that after the 20 weeks, that competitor had still not recovered their 1 rep max all of the 6 months afterwards. So do you say that recovery is judged in terms of the 1 rep max strength? When you look at the effects on things like testosterone and the testosterone to the cortisol ratio, so everyone knows what testosterone does, but cortisol is a potentially catabolic compound. So that breaks down your body's stores of adipose, protein, or carbohydrates, so it can metabolize that, so you can use that as fuel. So you don't want to have high amounts of cortisol. But you see that the ratios of testosterone to cortisol are still potentially depressed after about, say, potentially 6 months of that. And that's with sort of slower progressive weight gain. So it then sort of begs the question of, I mean, how do you approach your recovery, and how long does the recovery potentially take? Does it make more sense to gain the sort of weight much quicker back so you can readdress those hormonal issues, that hormonal balance that you potentially have? Or does it make more sense to sort of slowly gain the sort of weight a little bit thereafter that? And then we've got the psychological traits that come along with it as well. So if I was to give you something like the state anxiety test or the Beck anxiety test as well, and I do the test on you along with my body uneasiness test, and I see that you still are displaying attitudes of eating disorders, body dysmorphia, high state anxiety after 2 or 3 months, then you've still not potentially recovered. So I don't know.
Yeah.
is the answer to sort of some of this. Maybe if you're not really sort of getting yourself psychologically back to where you need to be after maybe about a month, then I guess you're really sort of still, you're struggling there, and you need to sort of really address things.
Yeah,
I mean,
you're stalling. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and your 1 rep max and things like that, that just takes time. I mean, the stronger you are, the longer it's going to take to get back to that. You're maybe looking at maybe about 3 or 4 months on recovering sort of that. And then it depends on your approach you take to try and get back to that as well, in terms of training and your dietary approach to this. So
indeed,
it's good to hear. I guess I don't really know.
Yeah, I love throwing these questions out at Andy, because obviously he's a very, very intelligent person, but I'm that kind of person who thinks outside the box. So I'm just like, guess what, Andy? I'm just going to throw this question at you, and then I stumble in, which is brilliant.
What's it they say? If you want to cross a bridge, don't ask a scientist, because you'll never cross the bridge. Ask an engineer.
Yeah.
Exactly. The scientists will normally sort of say, well, I don't know.
Oh, that's
I don't know if it's safe to cross.
Exactly. But no, I do love this question, because I just personally, I find it really, really informative. And I think it's just interesting to kind of delve into various different things. I think what is more interesting as well is the fact that you can compare females to males and how quick they recover, and how quick psychologically they recover as well. I found that a lot of female competitors, myself just asking this question, even 4 or 5 months down the line post-contest, they're still very, very food focused. Which is interesting, because, you know, once people get down to that very, very lean body fat type of thing, they start filling up their Instagram feeds with giant burgers and ice creams and things, and tempting themselves with things that they can't have. So it would be interesting to see the variance of men and women.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing I forgot to mention, actually, in terms of recovery, there is if you look at the literature, you do see reports of this, and anecdotally we know about this as well, about loss of menarche as well. So, I mean, we see that if you've not recovered that, say, then obviously you're still not recovered, are you? So,
absolutely.
I mean, you have to factor that in. And if you look at the literature in terms of what we see in terms of dysmorphia and eating attitudes, I mean, you will see higher scores of anxiety, dysmorphia, food focus, etc., in the female populations just in general.
Sure.
They're just slightly scoring higher than men in general. But when you look at the numbers of dysmorphic athletes and those that have eating attitude issues or subclinical eating disorders, then you sort of see that the prevalence is much, much higher in females compared to males. So, I mean, I've got some studies here that I've written down, but in 600 collegiate athletes, what you're seeing is around about 20% of them have potentially got some sort of subclinical eating disorder. And if you look at populations of weightlifters compared to bodybuilders, then what we see is when you look at the bodybuilding populations in females, some of them are reporting that, say, 40% of athletes already had some sort of eating disorder in place before they even became bodybuilders. So that's Wahlberg, that sort of study, I should say, if anyone wants to look that one up. That's quite a high number, I would say. But yeah, so maybe the approach to dealing with female athletes needs to be slightly different to the male athletes, and be aware that you might be dealing with someone here that has the potential for having eating disorders or disorder eating as a consequence of the diet. And this is why when we're talking about the recovery phase, we need to be very careful, because you don't want to trigger someone to potentially having some sort of disordered eating as a consequence of this. And this is reflected in our research too. So unfortunately, we see higher amounts of people who seem to have dysmorphia and eating attitude issues within the female cohorts compared to the male cohorts. It's reflected the same. It's about 20% to about, say, 9%.
Wow, wow. So that's really something that you've got to consider. It's frightening,
actually, really.
Yeah, it is, really, isn't it? So that's something that you should consider, guys, as well. I mean, I know that a lot of the people who listen to this podcast are already competitive bodybuilders, but for people who aren't, if you are thinking about competing, that is something that you've got to have a look at. Look at your personality, look at your attitude towards food already before you start embarking on a contest prep, as that could make matters worse.
I mean, there's something called the Big 5 personality inventory that you can do.
I've heard of that.
Do the BFI, and if you do the BFI, there's 5 personality traits, but one of the personality traits is neuroticism. So if you score high on neuroticism for your personality trait, then you also score high when you look at our populations for something called the Global Severity Index, which is related to that body uneasiness test. So if you're scoring high in neuroticism, then you're also likely to score high for muscle dysmorphia, etc. from this, which kind of makes sense. So if you're feeling kind of down on yourself and you're just a sort of more negative individual, then you're probably going to feel a little bit more like that in terms of how you feel about your own body. And then, I mean, maybe then bodybuilding shouldn't be for you.
Yeah.
We're really high in that, because maybe you don't want to potentially put yourself in a negative situation.
Indeed, yeah. Take up powerlifting or strongman instead.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Feel good about yourself.
Brilliant. Okay, so I think we're just about up on time here. You know, Andy, you've given me a really good amount of time as per usual. I'm always really appreciative of it. So, where can people find you if they want to ask any questions, and then if they want to volunteer for that questionnaire? I'll obviously get the link off you, but just tell them where they can find you.
Okay, so you can find me on Facebook. So I'm there on Facebook at Andrew Chappell Natural Bodybuilding. And then you can also find me on Instagram as well if you want to follow me there. So I'm fueled by Scottish oats, because I'm into eating porridge oats, like most Scotsmen. Yeah, so you can find me on there. And if you're interested in taking part in our study that we're running just now, we're trying to recruit some bodybuilders. We want to know about your attitudes towards food and your attitudes towards your own body and your personality. And we're running that just now. So there's a questionnaire that you can fill in. And we're interested if you're competitive just now, taking part, getting ready for your comp, or you've previously competitive. So we want off-season competitors and on-season competitors. So you can find me there.
Perfect. That's great. So I'll put all of the links under there, and then for any of the studies, I'll get the links off you there as well, Andy, and I'll put those links underneath. And that's it from us, guys. So thanks ever so much for tuning in. If you do have any questions at all for myself or for Andy, then obviously shoot us a DM or put it in the comments section under here on the YouTube, and we will get back to you as per usual. So until the next time, that is Don't Fear the Wait until the next episode. So thanks very much, Andy, and see you later, guys.
Thanks, folks. Cheers.